I was thinking this week, it's really ironic that last week I read a quote that said, no, I can't remember what it is. Something to the effect that when we leave a storm, we are not the same person who went in, and that's what the storm is all about. Now that was pretty kind of fascinating, and I had my doubts. Deborah was saying, you need to put up the shutters and so on, and I was thinking, nah, it's going to hit over there, it wouldn't affect us at all. But I did.
And I didn't say he needed to put them up because it was coming, mind you. I said, better safe than sorry.
That's right. And she was right. So today we're talking about dualism. I came up with some fascinating ideas around dualism this week as I observed things going on around us. And I thought would you get the slide here? One of the most perfect examples of dualism I could think of was Yin and Yang. And you may not necessarily think of Yin and Yang as dualism because, well, I'm going to talk about that. But Yin and Yang is a Chinese philosophical concept that describes opposite forces which are interconnected. And I believe the more important part of it is the interconnection part of the concept. It is said that Yin is the feminine side, is the dark side, and is receptive, and Yang is the lighter side and is the active principle. But they work together. And it's interesting, we talked a few weeks about this symbol and the representation of the masculine and the feminine in the symbol, and that the feminine is receptive and the masculine is the active part that that puts energy into the law, and then the result is manifestation. So it's kind of similar to that in a way. When you look at Yin and Yang from a life principle idea, that's how it works. But we quite often look at Yin and Yang, we see opposites of black and white. The opposites are actually diverse points of an ongoing spectrum. They're not necessarily opposites in terms of being oppositional to each other. We quite often see like winter and summer are opposite months, but they don't fight with each other. They don't argue with each other. North and the south are opposite parts of the globe, but you never see the north and the south fighting except maybe in football.
Humans.
Yeah, in the humans, yeah. Male and a female, well, yeah, they fight all the time. But light and dark are just, it's an ongoing spectrum from one to the other. There is no really any point where you can actually say, well, this is light and this is dark, except in our own perception. And quite often we need to use one to determine the nature of the other, and where the middle point of the others is. Hot and cold is the same thing, right and wrong, order and disorder. If you have a teenager and you order them to order up their room, it may not be as orderly as you wish it to be, but in their eyes it may be perfectly fine. Where is the line between order and disorder? Kind of hard to tell. Yin and Yang are opportunities for us to see, well, there is a middle point per se, maybe there's not, because it's all a part of one ongoing spectrum of energy. It's important to remember the Yin and Yang originate from unity. They originate from oneness. They are counterparts of Qi, which is the overall principle. And they are manifestations of dualities within the one nature. Because they proceed from the one, they can be thought as complementary forces rather than opposing forces. They complement each other. They can be opposing forces, but that does not necessarily mean that they are contrary or conflicting or contradictory. Their primary function is to balance. Oh, there's that word, to balance. Some of us need a little bit of that today. The two are balanced individually due to the dot of the other in each one's center. They automatically come as a balanced set. And they are actually a pair more than feuding sides. The nature of the two sides working together is portrayed in the image of sunlight passing over the peak of a mountain. As the sun moves through the sky, Yin and Yang gradually trade places with one another, revealing what was obscured and obscuring what was revealed before. And as the sun revolves around day by day, the same process happens over and over and over again, circularly. They're actually there to enhance their counterpoint. Now, this was made clear to me the other night when I walked out into the night and walked out in the street and looked both ways to see if anybody had electric, if any of the neighborhoods around us had any power. And I could see 4 or 5 blocks to the north a street light, and I could see about 5 or 6 blocks to the south another street light. In between, nothing. It was all dark. I had to walk into the darkness to be able to see the light, to find out if the light was there. Because in the daytime, I can't see street lights. Well, street lights aren't even on in the daytime. But even still, it'd be hard to distinguish the light from the particular source. But if I walk into the darkness, I can see where the light is. And our power came on again last night. So it was quite a long journey for us, I think. More than usual, I think. Also, in terms of the yin and yang, is the idea of strength and weakness. And we may have a different perspective on that than what we would usually think. Weak, or what we appear to be weak, or stationary or stagnant forces, can actually hold great strength. We saw this to be true. The atmospheric front that stalled the hurricane and redirected the hurricane was nothing more than air at a higher pressure, atmospheric pressure. It was nothing but air that allowed the entire hurricane to change its entire direction. Higher pressure was able to divert the fluster and buster and the wind and the rain that created low intensity and low pressure in that zone. So when it hit that high pressure zone, it actually moved in another direction. But it was nothing but air that made that happen. It kind of repelled the lower intensity energy and moved it off in another direction. It's important for us to remember that what happens in the atmosphere is simply a result of masses of different air pressure seeking the path of least resistance. That's all it is. We gave it a name, called it Yin, like it's some entity that is out to get us. The truth is it's nothing more than air pressure seeking paths of least resistance. That's all it is. Also, the stationary landmass form was nothing but a path of least resistance. It did absolutely nothing. It just sat there, being what it is, and the hurricane blew and dropped rain over it, but tended to slow it down. It did absolutely nothing. And so you could think of that as a weak force because it did nothing. But the air pressure began to dissolve. The wind energy began to dissolve because it was, what do you call that? Resistance, static. I can't think of the word, I didn't write it down. So as the stationary landmass didn't have to move or create anything to actually cause the hurricane to dissolve down to a tropical storm. It just had to be itself. That's all it was. And that's true of us as well. When we see chaos and storms are going on around us, all we have to do is just hold our ground and be who we are and allow it to move around and through us. Yes, it may cause a little bit of emotional or physical damage as it passes through us and around us, but it cannot possibly oppose us unless we let it within ourselves and create a change within ourselves.
Okay, well, great. So, in complete transparency, evidently I let a little bit of it in. Because I've been telling David for the last few days, I just feel like a whirlwind. I feel like that. And you know, there was no point at all in the storm, during the storm, where I felt afraid. I slept right through the night. It was just great. but something in me is still swirling. And it's kind of inviting me to take a look at how often I maybe do that. Do I do that when I am hearing a sad story about someone? Am I, instead of knowing all the truth like I think I am, is there some part of my physical being that is allowing that storm to get in me? Must be, or I wouldn't be feeling this. So, looking at dualism, I'm going to preach to myself now. So, in Science of Mind, Holmes defines duality as a belief in more than one power back of all things. And that is exactly what I'm talking about. I know I have a little bit more work to do, or I wouldn't feel the storm within me. David's been asking me for 2 or 3 days, as we did not have electric, how's your talk coming? And I was like, oh my God, it's all over the place. I could talk about this for a while, and I can talk about this for a while, and I can talk about this for a while, but I'm not sure how I'm going to transition from this to that to this to that, because I'm just feeling all over the place. And he's like, well, you know, why don't you come on out and rake some leaves or something, get out in nature, and you'll feel better. And I'm like, okay. That does, all that raking has got me more of it. So, you know, I'm going to be real with that. Anyone else feeling like that, by the way? Or am I? It's okay if I'm alone. Nobody else? Oh, good. I'm so happy for you. So, as I stand in the back today, I truly am happy for you, but as I stand in the back today, you know, you can just touch me and give me a little bit more of that. We can all use that sometimes. In dualism, Holmes also talks about the idea of philosophy. And he defines philosophy as a person's idea of life. Our idea of life is our philosophy about ourselves, about others, about the storm, about everything else. Our personal philosophy. Now, we are all working, I would think, and most importantly, working toward every thought is a prayer, every word is a prayer, and getting to the point where we do not have any duality left within us. Remember, no duality means no belief in more than one power back of things. No good and bad, only good. I'll talk about that a little bit more in a few minutes. So while science deals with the effects, and David talked a lot about the science of the storm and the air and the wind, philosophy deals with the causes, really. And philosophical ideas have existed for thousands of years, and they are still now being demonstrated by science. That's quantum. So listen to this. Now, it's from Cobb Institute. I didn't fact check it because I just chose to believe it, because I like it.
Maybe we didn't have internet until last night.
Maybe that's part of it too. But I thought this was amazing. According to quantum physics, a particle vibrating due to your sound when you speak can affect a molecule inside a star at the edge of the universe instantly. This phenomenon is known as quantum entanglement. Here's a really good part. First of all, isn't it good to know how important your sound, your word, your thought even is? Maybe eventually quantum will prove the thought does also, which they really already have, but the crowds need to get on board. So here's the end of that quote. The greatest illusion of this universe is the illusion of separation. Wow. When we are fully in a state of knowingness, that we are one and living that, imagine what life will be or is like. So my question would be, are you an illusionist? And David talked a lot right now about the storm and how maybe easy it is to blame the storm or to blame whatever. There is no blame. There are consequences. There are always consequences to our choices. And it's easy to be an illusionist because we do appear to be separate. I can see you over there and me right here. I can see you each as different entities. And so it does appear that we are separate. And that is our greatest fallacy, to believe in dualism. And it's easy to fall into that trap. Most of us are taught that as a child. We are taught that we are separate. However, the idea is a false belief. And so let's take a look at a couple of stories. One, Adam and Eve. And I don't know if this is going to align with your thoughts about the story of Adam and Eve, but I had to teach Sunday school and I taught all those stories, and I taught a whole lot of children things I really didn't believe. I went and I taught them because I was teaching what I was taught, and I thought that we all had like this mental agreement that we didn't really believe them, but we said them anyway. Why, I don't know. Didn't understand that part till I found New Thought. Then I was like, oh my gosh, home. I'm home. Finally, there are other people in the world that are as alien as I am and believe this thing that actually makes sense. Go figure. So Adam and Eve, my story of Adam and Eve. They lived in the Garden of Eden, which Ernest Holmes calls life in its pure sense, the Garden of Eden. I'm going to call it paradise. I'm going to call it perfection. They lived in perfection, the garden of their soul. And long story short, Eve is tempted and eats an apple. Now for me, that represents simply a wrong choice, a wrong direction, and it moves toward dualism. Now they are able to experience dualism. But that means that they lost the idea of unity, of consciousness of unity, of paradise. And so for me, we're all traveling back to that place where we are so fully orbed in love that we are able to truly know and be that unity, that consciousness that God is. For me, the serpent represented the outer rim of spiritual existence, and Ernest Holmes talks about that and defines it in that way. And what that means is the life principle viewed from the isolated and materialistic basis. This is not the space in which any of us desire to live, and yet many of us do. He speaks in the book on this page about how there are thousands, and I'm going to exaggerate and say there are millions, whose hearts are sad because they believe they're a sinner and they're going to hell. Unless, of course, they have some person let them know that they're good and that they can now go to heaven. No, my beautiful friends, you are that person. You are already that person. Do we all move in wrong directions sometimes? Absolutely. But I'm going to tell you right now, for the first time in 2 or 3 days, the energy that you are sending my way, or my own energy or my own word, has shifted what I feel. I no longer feel that chaos. I no longer feel that spinning like I'm distracted in many different directions. So thank you, if it's you. And if it's me, thank me. And the words that Ernest Holmes uses for this, or actually that Jesus uses, and Ernest Holmes writes it and talks about it, is we must be lifted up. He says that this is to say we must realize our divine nature and our relationship with God. Realize our divine nature and our relationship with God. You are that powerful. You are that power. There is nothing else you could be created as. He says that the relationship is a complete unity. And so we must produce within ourselves that consciousness of unity. Yes, I am my brother's keeper, my sister's keeper. I am my brother and my sister. How could I not be? What I do to another, I do to myself. And we want to produce that consciousness of unity that leads us into that Garden of Eden. I absolutely love what David wrote on the email that we sent out to everybody, to all of you. Hopefully you got it. If you didn't have electric, you have it to look forward to. He wrote, Ian, I-A-N, I am nature. I am nature. I am that storm also. It is me. It's all, each of us. We are one with it, as it. We do not say that there is no evil experience, but we do say evil is not an entity of itself. It is a misuse of power. I know my neighbor, I'm not quite bold enough to say this on my own, but she really did say it, so I can use it because I wanted to, but I didn't quite dare to. Not quite that bold. But here's the truth. Many were told to leave and chose not to. Many chose not to board up their houses. And we suffer the consequences of our own actions. And someone else was saying to me, and Mark kind of alluded to it too with the New Jersey boy and the blizzards. I grew up in Vermont, and someone was saying to me, you know, you choose where you live. You can choose a different place to live. You don't have to live where there are hurricanes. And I'm like, well, where am I going to go? California, they have earthquakes. Well, my family lives in California, and they're okay with the earthquakes. Here's the truth. We wouldn't trade lives with anyone. We are choosing our experiences. And some of them don't feel good. That's because we're human. And we sometimes make choices that bring us to our knees. So while you're down there on your knees, pray. And I'm going to conclude with this wonderful statement that I almost jumped up and said, amen, 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 when Mark said something about shut up. Because I don't usually talk like that. And, well, I don't think I ever talk like that. But I found this really cool statement. So here's the conclusion for today's dualism talk. Sometimes you have to tell the negative committee that meets inside your head to just sit down and shut up. And so it is.
So it is.